Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the MAD podcast. I've been very much looking forward to the conversation. There's so much to talk about. You are the co-founder and CEO of Moonhub AI, which is an AI co-pilot for the world of recruiting, but you're also a very active investor in the world of AI. You are the editor-in-chief of The Gradient, which is an AI newsletter that I would absolutely recommend to anyone listening to this, that I consume pretty much daily. And last but certainly not least, you were recently named to the Times list of the 100 most influential people in AI. So amazing. Congratulations on all of this. Love to start those conversations typically with your background. You've done some really interesting things leading you to all of this. So yeah, would love to hear your story.
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me here, Matt. Really appreciate it and very excited to chat with everyone here. I will say I was the editor-in-chief. I helped found the Gradient, but I'm less involved nowadays on a day-to-day basis there. So hey everyone, I'm Nancy. I am the founder of Moonhub, where I'm also the CEO today. At Moonhub, we are building AI-powered recruiters. So think about every company in the world. Our goal is to help enable those companies to scale their best ideas through the power of people. And, my personal story prior to Moonhub, I was over at Stanford. I was a computer science PhD there, working on some of the early generations of foundation models and LLMs that you see out there in the AI world today. And when I was at Stanford at the time, I had this really interesting insight, which was I heard a lot of people talking about AI as this way through sort of the lens of fear of like it's going to automate everyone's jobs. People were concerned about what that would look like for the future of work. And I fundamentally believe I think there's a world where we can actually use AI to help people in that future actually find better opportunities, as opposed for people, to see AI as a source of like taking away their jobs. And so that's fundamentally what we really work on at Moonhub, and we do this in the form of creating an AI recruiter that helps these companies scale.
Great. So you have just launched, so this is a timely conversation. So tell us more about how that works, how the product actually, what it actually does.
Sure, absolutely. So you can go to moonhub.ai and try out the product yourself. So there we do have a a get started version that anyone can try out without paying or creating any sort of being a paying customer. And what we've done at Moonhub is if I look at the recruiting process today, I break it down roughly into what I call 5 different stages. So there's sort of the initial stage of calibrating on what you're looking for. There's a stage of actually finding those candidates, so what is traditionally called sourcing. And then there's the outreach phase. This is where you're reaching out to everyone, trying to see if they're interested in your opportunity. Then you're screening them, and then you're scheduling, managing the interview process and everything downstream of there. And at Moonhub, our goal is to build an AI that acts as your co-pilot through that entire process. And today, if you log into our website, we just launched this recently. You can actually go and talk to our sourcing AI yourself, chat with it like you would a normal recruiter. Say, hey, I'm Matt, and I'm looking for an amazing software engineer. I need someone in the Bay Area, and they need to have some experience with Python. And I want someone who, worked at a Series A company before, whatever it is you're interested in. And Moonhub, will go out there. We index about 1 billion people's data across the public web, bring back those profiles that are relevant for you, and then also work through the calibrating and actually answering helping you strategize around your search. So you might ask, what are some companies that use Python that I should be looking at for my recruiting purposes? And Moonhub will help you work through that. And then if you become one of our paying customers, we will help you through that entire end-to-end process, past sort of the sourcing component as well.
Is part of the idea that you can sort of accelerate the process of what a manual recruiter would do, but also 2, perhaps find people that would be less obvious? Is that part of what you're trying to do?
That's a great point. Yeah. So today we work with about 100 companies. Actually, before we launched, we work with about 100 companies, helping them hire and scale their teams. So some of our sort of early customers pre-launch were companies like Inflection, Anthropic, Sandbox, U.com, public companies out there as well as some early stage startups. And these companies work with us because we help them hire at half the cost, 3 times faster. And this is enabled by giving them a lot of the the AI gives them control of running the process. So if you've ever used an external recruiter yourself before, Matt, you'd know that, normally you wait a week, you finally get on that call with the recruiter, they ask you some questions, 2 weeks later, they send you a couple candidates, turns out they're not a good fit, and then it's a month rolls by, and you're finally starting to find maybe a couple of people that you think are good. And I think the real power of AI for in the next 1 or 2 years is enabling these non-experts to be able to participate in the workflows that traditionally experts will do. So at Moonhub, what we do is we make it possible for you as a hiring manager or a recruiting leader to talk to the AI without knowing how to use Boolean searches or sort of the traditional lingo and, complexities of recruiting, be able to work and collaborate on that step of the process so that the entire recruiting cycle is shorter and faster for you. And that, of course, leads to cost savings for you as well. So that's the first part, is just like you can get started faster with Moonhub, you can hire faster, and you can get ultimately better quality candidates. And then to your point, Matt, on the second half, a big reason why companies work with us is because we help them find candidates they wouldn't otherwise find. And this goes to the part of AI being sort of a knowledge aggregator, but we crawl information on, people across the public web. So whether that's your Google Scholar page, your GitHub page, your LinkedIn page, various other pages that have information that might be relevant to whether or not someone is a good fit for an opportunity. We run models that aggregate all of this data. We train our LLMs on top of this, and ultimately surface that as a conversational interface, which you can try out today, and helps you find the right people at the right time.
So ideally, I may not have gotten to Stanford or whichever other top school, but maybe you'll find that I've contributed a lot to open source on GitHub, and therefore you'll surface me.
Yeah, I think one of the big pain points in recruiting today is if you're not a recruiter, oftentimes what I've observed is you're really just looking for proxies of what you really want, right? So let's say what you really want is someone who has shown signs of excellence in their last job. You can't really tell a system, show me people with signs of excellence today, and it'll show you those people. So you end up with these very rough proxies or approximations they went to an Ivy League school, they got promoted recently, they worked at one of these 5 companies that you think highly of. But that itself is a very small subset of all the people that could potentially have been had shown signs of excellence in their last role. And I think the power of AI is it allows you to better navigate that sort of what I call like the gray data, and help people understand and find the right hidden gems within that gray data.
Yeah. And I assume hopefully a big part of the hope is that from a diversity perspective, it will be fairer and more open, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen this already. We work with a lot of companies who, diversity is top of mind for a lot of them. And when they use Moonhub, they tell us, hey, you've been able to show me like 80% of the candidates that I found through you, I haven't found in any other platform. And they tend to be more diverse. They come from more underrepresented groups as well.
Yeah, and on the topic of diversity, like the sort of like good old question, but obviously that's a fundamentally important one around how AI models are trained. Like how does that manifest for something like Moonhub in terms of on the one hand you want to increase diversity, or you hope that better diversity is a positive consequence of what you do, but on the other hand, AI models may have been trained on data that indicates that is not as fair to diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And we care a lot about diversity at Moonhub and how we think about it, especially in the context of recruiting. My big hope is, in the AI future, where I think a lot of jobs are going to change, I think most people underestimate how much AI will impact their daily lives, and especially what their work will look like in 5 years from now. And we want to help prepare those people for that future, and helping them make sure that they have the right meaningful opportunities that are meaningful to them. So in terms of diversity, like we do a couple of things. So one is, we do a lot of we do a lot of data cleaning and just data quality. So measuring our data quality, making sure our data is accurate, that it's well deduplicated, that we make sure, that any models that we run on the data, we only push them into production if they've hit a certain threshold of accuracy. So for example, today, if you wanted to go on Moonhub, because diversity is such an important thing, we actually support our users doing sort of diversity-oriented searches. So you can say, hey, I really care about gender diversity. Please boost my search so I see more diverse candidates. We will do that. And the model that actually powers that behind the scenes, we run it against a lot of validation sets, and we make sure it's 95, 99% plus accuracy before we push it into production. And we're constantly evaluating the models that we run on. But that said, I think in this space, there's a lot more we can be doing. And we're constantly sort of scanning the horizon for what else we could be doing on the engineering and product side to make sure that, we responsibly use AI.
And to the extent that you can talk about it, can you maybe take us under the hood in terms of how it works, under the hood or behind the scenes, whatever the analogy is, for the models you use or the stack or whatever you can talk about?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. And a lot of people ask us this question. So at Moonhub, we build a combination of our in-house proprietary LLMs. We do use a couple of third-party LLMs for very specific use cases. And I think the sort of really foundational innovation that we've developed here is we've created a whole system for a central LLM to orchestrate our entire conversational interface and all the actions that it's able to perform. And this is actually something that we have filed in a patent recently. So underneath the hood, to the extent I can share, you can think about you can think about pulling all the public data about people, companies, and relevant enterprise news and articles on the internet. So for example, this might be data sources like Crunchbase, GitHub, Google Scholar, etc. Aggregating all of that, feeding it into putting it into various data stores. So we have, for example, structured data stores like your more things like Elasticsearch. We have vector data stores, and we use various other kinds of data stores as well. And then we actually have an LLM that coordinates how to retrieve data from the right data stores. So this allows you as the end user to look for things like, hey, show me people who currently work at an early stage startup in the Bay Area who's familiar with Python. Different parts of this sentence, some of this is more structured, right? Like early stage startup means seed, Series A, Series B, knows Python. That can be a little more fluffy, right? So it could be they mention PyTorch, or they mention building some backend system that is traditionally made in Python, whatever that might be. But our LLM actually learns how to route to the right data stores and how to actually appropriately map the natural language queries that you provide into retrieval. And then on top of this, we have built some custom retrieval pipelines on top of our data. And we ingest into our core LLM recruiting specific knowledge that we've collected from recruiters around the world, including our internal recruiters, so that our LLMs can answer recruiting knowledge questions with more accuracy than your typical sort of world knowledge LLMs.
Great. And just to play it back to make sure I understood. So that's external data, but that's also internal data a little bit. So I can tell Moonhub, hey, find me a Rust developer that looks a little bit like this, and I can show the profile of my best Rust developer.
Yeah. So we today, if you use the platform, you'll get immediately access to public data. So you'll get access to some of our public data stores. And then for some of our enterprise customers, we help them do integrations with their own internal data stores. And that allows them to, say, it makes the AI smarter. So you might be able to say, hey, this candidate is more likely to join your company because I observe based on your ATS that traditionally people at large companies tend to do better in the interview process and they're more likely to accept an offer.
Okay, so the vector database is also like to pull in internal data from the customer. Okay, really interesting. And then just to drive it home, the sort of the execution layer of this is what you send an email automatically to the candidate, or you connect with through LinkedIn, or like how does that work? Or you make a recommendation and then people should do their own reach out.
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you log in today, you'll be presented with what we call our sourcing AI. So conversational interface, you talk to it, it'll answer strategic questions and then help you find candidates that are relevant. Once you find, let's say, 100 candidates you think are a good fit for your project, what you can do from there is reach out to those in a somewhat automated fashion. So you can write email sequences to them. The AI will help you craft email sequences. And then I should comment by saying our product is not there's the core AI, but we also augment it with actual expert recruiters behind the scenes as well, to enable you to do end to end. So customers that work with us, they're using the AI to source and to help outreach. But if they don't want to do that, our human recruiters can actually help them with those components too, as well as helping you screen the candidates. So our recruiters will actually hop on calls, screen the candidates for you, give you the data back, help you, prepare data for compensations and offers as well. So we do offer that end to end. And Matt, traditionally, I think a lot of people, for us, we see our main sort of the biggest parallel to what we build is probably the external recruiting agencies of the world. So if you've ever worked with a boutique external recruiter or a big one like a Robert Half or Randstad, those are sort of somewhat of an analog to what we build. And oftentimes we see companies who have used those are extremely frustrated. They come to us and then they use our AI first experience, and they get better results there.
Oh, that's very interesting. And is that you think what the business is going to look like in 5 years from now, or is that a first stage as you keep training the AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our ambition is not to build another. I think there are a lot of companies out there trying to build tools, like recruiting tools. Our ambition in the long term is really to build the AI-powered end-to-end recruiter for you. And so that's what we have offered from the beginning is an end-to-end recruiter. And today, the AI can't do all 5 stages of the process I mentioned to you. It might do stage 1, stage 2. We'll probably get to stage 5 by mid next year. But in the interim, you have a human who's actually helping you with all those other stages and making sure you have a seamless end-to-end process. And so when companies, they work with us, it's oftentimes they're looking for that end-to-end recruiting experience. And so, quote unquote, our competitors tend to be these like 50-year-old legacy organizations that, many of them still have fax machines, and it's a total human business, basically.
And you think eventually the end-to-end includes interviewing? There's a screen I think you mentioned, but do you think the AI can ultimately determine, in a few years from now, okay, this is the best candidate for the job?
I think in a few years from now, we'll definitely have AI that is smart enough to do it. But I think the question is more so whether or not candidates will be, how much it'll impact the candidate experience so that people actually want to deploy it, right? And for us, if you look at what today you might engage an external recruiter for, external recruiters actually don't do any of the interviewing for you. They help you screen, they help you source. And so we think that's the really big opportunity. And we look at what that particular segment of work does today. We think that is something our AI plus really talented experts on the team can, we've shown that they can do it together end to end very effectively already.
And you mentioned you already have 100 customers, which is sort of amazing, considering you're a seed stage company and you just launched. Any sort of tips, strategies, lessons that you could offer to other, seed stage companies about how one gets from 0 to 100 customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And not sure if it's repeatable, but happy to share my 2 cents. So before we launched, we had about 100 customers. After our launch, we've, since, as you can imagine, gained a lot more. But pre-launch, one of the things that we were very specific about building, unlike I think a lot of sort of SaaS companies today, is we wanted to really understand exactly the end state of what it is we wanted to build. So I I recently said this online somewhere, but I think a lot of the opportunities for AI startups is to find something that is traditionally very difficult to scale, but very easy to sell. And then you try to scale it with AI. And I think recruiting is exactly that. So, we work with an industry where there's more than 100 recruiting agencies in the United States that each make more than 100 million in revenue a year. They're all basically human capital businesses. They're services businesses. And for us early on, one of the biggest things that we did was just invest in actually understanding how all of these very human-oriented businesses operate. So we actually built out our own basically end-to-end services business. It takes a lot of work early on. But from there, you get so much of the product learnings. We now have a feedback loop where everyone on our team is essentially a pilot customer of our product and our AI. And that's enabled us very early on to acquire customers, even as the AI is just starting to develop. And then over time, these customers use more and more of the AI. And that's been really helpful for us. And of course, I think you want to make sure your early customers have an incredible experience. So we, a lot of them I hop on calls personally with them quite often. And within the 100 customers we had pre-launch, I would say at least 50% of them came through referrals from the existing early access customers. And we're very targeted in terms of who we would allow early access to as well.
Okay, very cool. And as I'm sure you're actively recruiting and all the things, maybe tell us a little bit about the company. So from my notes, I see that you raised a large seed, 13.8 million from Khosla, Google Ventures, AIX Ventures, which is Richard Socher, who actually introduced the two of us. Thanks, Richard. Day One Ventures, Susan Vajicki, Ram Shiram, and so on and so forth, Mark Volpe, Chris Ray. Awesome group of investors and sort of AI folks. Anything you can share, like how many of you are there in the company? Who are you recruiting for? Like anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are, we just announced this with our launch that we've raised about 10 million so far. We raised a round earlier last year, and then we had a lot of interest over the summer in raising around pre-launch. So we did something small internally. So as part of that, the team at Khosla has been incredibly helpful. Folks at GV, you mentioned AIX. We also recently brought on Mark Benioff as one of our larger investors as well. So from Salesforce, and we're looking more and more as we scale towards working with large enterprise customers. And so, of course, Mark has been really helpful there, as well as some other additional investors, Barry Eggers, who is one of the founding partners of Lightspeed, Mike at Index, as well as some other folks there. In terms of where our team is at today, so we're 15 people. We're trying to keep the team lean, but we are actively hiring. So, of course, internally, we're looking for ML engineers, full stack engineers, recruiters, designers, PMs, a lot of the sort of functional areas we're all hiring in. And I will say, as a company that works on AI in the recruiting space, we actually dog food our own product. So we don't have like a specific internal recruiting team. We essentially act as customers to our own recruiting product and our recruiting org, and they treat us just like any other customer.
Yes. So should people still apply, or you'll find them? Like if you're good, you'll find them.
Please apply. If we will try to find you, but it's always better when folks apply and they're interested, right? And we do actually review our lever on a daily basis. So if you do apply, you can't expect to hear back. And that's, I feel like, always something people should know.
And are you distributed, or are you all in the Bay Area or Steph?
We're, I would say we're hybrid. So most of the team lives in the Bay Area or New York. And we're remote first, but we do offsites like 4 or 5 times a year, so quite frequently.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, amazing on Moonhub. Sounds super interesting. Like what a wonderful application of AI, and I just love the way you position it and phrase it. All really exciting. Maybe if you could switch hats for a second and put your investor hat on. I saw your founder and GP of your own firm, and with a really interesting list of companies. So maybe walk us through how this came about, why you do it, and how you do it, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So for context for folks who are listening, I run a fund, Shoe Ventures. It's my own personal venture fund. And a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to essentially invest in several of my friends. And the way it came about was, I have a lot of friends who have since built incredible companies. And maybe 4 or 5 years ago, before starting Moonhub, I was observing all my friends starting these companies. I'm like, man, it would have been really great to invest in them. And some of them are, people that I knew from Stanford when I was there for either undergrad or PhD or MBA. And some of them I knew from before. Turns out when I was much younger, I was on the US math team, and it turns out there are a lot of people there who have since started their own companies or physics Olympiad teams, computing Olympiads. It's kind of a small community, but it turns out a lot of those people ended up starting companies and being very successful. So I feel very lucky to have known them. And so I originally met, do you know Mike Volpe at Index?
Yeah, of course. He actually spoke at the, almost on this podcast, Data Driven NYC, which is
okay, cool. Yeah. So Mike's amazing. And I met Mike maybe 5-6 years ago through Alexander Wang, who founded Scale. And Alex and I knew each other from way back. And Alex had introduced me to Mike at the time through a different context. So at a couple of years, ago, Mike was like, oh, you should definitely think about Index has this thing called they make funds for people, basically like individual funds. So I think, like, for example, Dylan at Figma also has one of these funds, and some of my other friends do too. And so Mike was like, oh, you should come. We'll help set up a mini fund for you. And so I really owe it to Mike for helping me get started there. And because of that, I was able to invest in many of my good friends' companies early on. It's definitely not the rigorous investing process that you probably have, Matt, or any other major venture fund has. It was really just investing in my good friends. And I was already helping them out with their startups, helping them think through early on. And I love helping them sort of just like think through early on how to, set up the company and stuff. And then I later had the opportunity to invest, which was awesome. And then after that, the first couple investments went pretty well. And so a couple of my friends just came in and they're like, hey, we'll put in some money. You can just keep investing from your own fund. And that's really how it started, Matt. And, I feel very lucky to have been able to be on the journey for a lot of great companies, many in the AI space, some of them like Replicate or U.com. Some are seeing a lot of growth recently. So that's been great. And
maybe as any proper VC, we will use any opportunity to like shamelessly plug their companies and talk about like how great they are. So just like to give you that moment. So like any company that you would highlight that either they're doing super well, or they're particularly interesting, or you just like them for whatever reason.
I just like them. So sure. I appreciate you giving me that chance. So definitely a couple of companies that I think really highly of. So I mentioned the folks at Replicate. I think they've been in the news recently for building.
So what does Replicate do, maybe for anybody in the audience that may not have heard of them?
Yeah, for sure. So Replicate essentially builds like these AI models that they allow you to run open source ML models. So a lot of folks will go to them and run their own ML models for some of the more recent models that are coming out. And they've been really good at helping run ML models in the cloud basically immediately after they become open source. And then we have some other companies. I think you mentioned U.com. They're an incredible company building consumer search, and everyone should try them out. And then, some more companies on more like the healthcare side, for example, Ambiance. So it's a team that's building essentially AI-powered medical scribing for the telehealth and healthcare industry. And that team, Michael and Nikhil, both incredibly brilliant. And the company, I think, is really doing a lot of good in the world today. And the list goes on. But I think you can probably find online somewhere the list of companies that I've invested in. I will say nowadays I'm very much doubling down on the companies we've invested in already. And so opportunistically investing in some, again, good friends, that less active in sort of investing in new companies.
Yes, there's only so much one can do. But maybe taking a step back as both an operator and an investor. There's so much going on in AI. Like any sort of interesting area or project or company that you sort of intrigued by that people listening to this may want to like look into, like, or any trend or like anything that you find interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of my interest stem from building Moonhub nowadays. And I think as we build the company, I'm seeing a lot of very interesting, what I call, it's like ML in production trends that we're following. So one, for example, is obviously agents are a big thing. I consider what we build to be, in some cases, an instance of an agent. But I think, for example, the type of retrieval framework across like semi-structured data is not really, there isn't really good open source to do this today, as far as I'm aware. And we had to build some of this stuff in-house. But I'm constantly sort of assessing this trade-off of, should we build this in-house, or will someone build a company specifically to do this in 6 months? Right. An example of this is there's the sort of Pinecone, Weaviates, Chromas of the world that build vector DBs, and it's great for what I call more like free-form text data. But it's actually not as good for some things that perhaps are more like your traditional Elasticsearch type problems. And I see a lot of people in the industry building sort of their own hybrid solutions of these two things. But I think, if someone could really combine all these different data sources together with an LLM that's smart enough to access them, which I do know some of the bigger LLM companies I've talked to are building this internally right now. It's just not released yet. That is something I think is very exciting. I think some of the other exciting challenges that I'm always sort of on the lookout for are interesting approaches to sort of UI UX of agents. Building Moonhub has helped me really appreciate the power of a good UX. And inherently, I think a lot of these interfaces, like the conversational interfaces, are not very intuitive for new users, but it is very clear to me that some of this is going to be the future. And so it's like, how do you build those UI UX interfaces that bridge what is intuitive for users today with like what will be intuitive for them tomorrow? If anyone knows any great sort of like agent interfaces, I would love to see it. But I think the default I've seen is like half the screen is the AI, the other half is the normal application. Or for some of the more AI native companies, sort of what I consider Moonhub to be, it's like the full thing is the conversational interface. And then you actually have like, widgets within the conversation. But it's not clear to me that's like the sort of final ultimate UX that's the best for users.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So do you think that in terms of like opportunities for startups and sort of new products to be launched in the market and not being immediately sort of like killed by big tech, which obviously is a topic that everybody thinks about, this kind of like either vertical or sort of like discrete problem, but like in a full stack way is the way to go, where like you do work at the model layer, but like ultimately you deliver an application. Is that where you think most of the opportunities are, like including some of the healthcare stuff that you've been invested in, great companies that you've invested in?
Short answer is yes. You hit it on that. I've always been a big believer in vertical companies, and I think especially in today's where you see the open AIs of the world, it's very hard to compete in a platform level company unless you have substantial funding. And Chris, I'm not sure if I ended up publishing this, but my PhD advisor, Chris Ray, and I actually wrote a piece together maybe 4 or 5 years ago on just like building vertical AI companies and some of the sort of common how do I call them, like challenges that they face and how you should sort of think about them. But I've basically, my entire career has been one big bet on building vertical AI agents. Like the company I worked at for my PhD at CASA, also a great company. We were building essentially AI to automate back office healthcare, so revenue cycle. Amazing company. During my PhD, Chris and I worked a lot on sort of these foundation models for more agent-like workflows. We have some papers from like custom automating customer support and all these other vertical applications. But I do think for a startup to be competitive today, a lot of people talk about, oh, there's these new AI moats and what are moats in the AI era. I think there are definitely some moats that arise that are different from what you traditionally see, but I think a lot of the traditional software moats still apply, right? Like you have deep integrations with the company. You have like longstanding, I don't know, sales contracts with Elad Guild has a great piece on like what are moats for startups that you can read on this. But I do think that vertical applications give you the best chance at creating a longer term competitive moat relative to, I think I almost just assume that large language models will become commoditized. And then it's how do you actually nail the use case so the customer stays with you for many years and decades.
Yeah, great. What's the reality of the whole AI agents thing? I mean, like it's the I guess for the last few months has been the sort of the topic du jour that like everybody when you ask, oh, what are you excited about? Like you always find people typically my venture capital colleagues saying, oh, AI agents. But like, what is the sort of reality of it in production, and what are some examples, like real world examples of AI agents actually at work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear your thoughts here too, Matt, because I'm sure you see a lot more companies on a day-to-day basis than I do. And I think the short answer is don't be fooled by demos. I think a lot of people look at demos and they think immediately like, wow, AGI, it can play, and just like sees one intelligent task and then extrapolates to like, you have to realize the progression or hierarchy of knowledge is different for AI than it is for humans, right? So for humans, you think if I can play chess, then I must also be able to walk, talk, eat, and do everything else. But it's not the same for an AI. If it can play chess, doesn't entail you can do all these other things. And I think that is one common assumption, which is wrong. Like if you talk to lay people, right, they think, oh, it can do this, now it must know everything else. I think going back to AI agents and production, I think there's a lot of cool demos out there, but getting something to really be production ready is extremely difficult. And this is something I've come to appreciate building Moonhub. Like there's just some of the nuances, for example, it's great if you can get it to work 80% of the time, but there's probably no value until you get it working 99% of the time, right? And that last 19% or 5%, as people say, is extremely hard.
Yeah.
And it oftentimes is not like you just retrieve more data for the LLM. It's probably like you're going to have to build some hacky fixes on top of it and corner cases and resolve all the corner cases for your specific use case. And that's where, I think nailing the vertical application can give you somewhat of an edge against these like more broad LLMs.
As someone who's in the trenches, like talking to customers, selling to customers every day, what's your sense of the level of ultimate receptivity of people to deploying AI, or is that not a question for Moonhub because you basically abstract away the whole AI and you just deliver great candidates?
I think people are, at least in our space, people are incredibly excited about the potential of AI, but no one wants to go first.
Yeah.
So it's like everyone wants to do it, but no one wants to be the first person to do it and see what could go wrong. And so I think at Moonhub, we've sort of benefited from this psychology in that, many companies come to us because they see us as a way to help them transform into AI first organizations. And oftentimes talent is one of the first places and the easiest places where you can become sort of AI first. So we help a lot of companies who are going through this transition where, they have some mandate from their CEO and their CEO says, hey, I need you. We all have to be an AI company by the end of this year, right? And then everyone's like, well, how do I become an AI company? And everyone's just kind of running around, not sure what to do. And so, from Moonhub's perspective, we help a lot of those companies sort of become those AI first companies. That said, though, we do somewhat, like you said, Matt, like we give people the option to use our AI to help better collaborate with their recruiter, but it isn't if they don't want to use it, they don't have to. If when it comes to Moonhub, right? So almost everyone chooses to use it, but it sort of gives them that optionality so that, I think when you start selling to larger and larger customers, their compliance becomes an issue. So having the optionality of being able to abstract the compliance behind like something that's more services like is very helpful for selling into larger organizations.
Yep. Are you sensing that like this big wave of hype we've had for the last 9 months, is that starting to like slow down a little bit, like from your perspective, or is that just as vibrant as ever?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's the hype from like the investment perspective, and then there's the hype from like what I call the talent perspective, and they're very correlated but not the same. So we have so much talent data that in the last couple of weeks we've actually been releasing what we call like talent insights. So for example, our team has mapped out where all the ML engineers in the US are, and it turns out the majority of them are in the Bay Area, and that's why you should, if you want to build an AI company, you should probably go to the Bay Area, right? And I think another fun one that we've looked into recently is just this title of prompt engineer. A lot of people want to call themselves prompt engineer because it's like the cool thing on the street to be called, right? And if you look at the data, it's like basically until 2023, no one called themselves a prompt engineer. And then in 2023, all of a sudden, 1,000 people in SF are now a prompt engineer. And that number is actually like relatively stable since in the last couple of months. It isn't like everyone's trying to become a prompt engineer. Maybe they're going for something else. I don't know. And maybe now it's like a RAG expert or something. I'm not sure. But it could be something like that. I think on the investor side, so we raised a round recently. Most of it was, we had a lot of external interest, but we didn't want to raise that big of a round. So we decided mostly to go internal where possible. I think the excitement is still there, but I think there is more of a reservation around people wanting to find, like I often hear people saying, I want to find applications of AI agents with real economic like value is sort of what I hear. And I think people are starting to realize like, well, ultimately these companies do have to be real companies, and there needs to be a real customer proposition there. And I'm really curious to see how these sort of large open source projects will evolve. Like, because not naming any particular ones, but there are definitely some that have, tens of thousands of stars on GitHub. But if you look at where those stars are coming from, it's mostly hobbyists. And I'm sure you can monetize hobbyists and sort of grow from there. But I think it is like a very big stepping stone for these AI companies to go from like hobbyists to becoming something that like enterprises will actually want to buy. Yep.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, it sounds like in this fast evolving world, you are incredibly well positioned as a full stack vertical application, as we discussed. So look, it's been super interesting. Congratulations on the launch. Congratulations on all the progress and everything you've built so far. And I'm very excited to see how you continue to progress. Where can people find you online and learn more about the company and all those things?
Well, you can learn more about Moonhub. Just go to moonhub.ai, click get started. And then for anyone listening to this, if you want to try the product or if you need support, you can email me, Nancy@moonhub.ai. I will personally be your customer support if you need it for the product. And of course, feel free to shoot me an email if you're looking for a new opportunity. We're always hiring.
And you're on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever, like, do you?
Twitter, on Twitter, it's @NancyXUS. That's me. On LinkedIn, search up my name. You'll find me. You can always shoot me a DM or send me an email.
Okay, wonderful. All right, well, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much, Nancy. And we'll look forward to seeing how you go. Very excited for the company and the positioning thing. It's super interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.